Good afternoon, fine patrons of the theater, and welcome to the King's Company performance of The Winter's Tale. Tonight, we will be performing Act 3, Scene 2 of Master Shakespeare's work. For those of you not quite intimately familiar with the play, allow me to catch you up to speed. This is a romance play, which combines all the best elements of comedy and tragedy with a little magic sprinkled in for flavor. The beginning of our story follows King Leontes and his very pregnant wife, Hermione. In their company is Leontes' best friend, Polixenes, the king of Bohemia. The three get along like a house on fire until, that is, a seed of jealousy sparks in Leontes' mind. Could his best friend be sleeping with his wife? Could the child Hermione bears not belong to her husband? Polixenes flees, fearing for his reputation, and Hermione is thrown in prison just before baby Perdita is born. Filled with doubt, Leontes escalates his adulterous claims to the public court, which is where our scene begins. You, our audience, are part of the jury. Is Hermione guilty? You'll have to wait and see.
I'm going to exit the share screen just for a moment. We're having some technical difficulties.
We are still experiencing those technical difficulties, so it's going to be a minute. Enjoy the screen. It's a very nice piece of art that was put together by Samantha.
Sorry about that. I jinxed myself yesterday when I said the technology was working the whole time. So I'm just here to give you some contextualization of The Winter's Tale. The Winter's Tale was written around 1610 or 1611 during the reign of King James I. The main source for The Winter's Tale is Robert Greene's pastoral romance Pendasto, which was published in 1588. King James was a lover of the arts, and when he became king in 1603, he elevated Shakespeare's company to the official royal playing company, the King's Men, hence our name, the King's Company. James was also an absolutist, a vocal advocate of the divine right to rule of the monarchy. The first recorded performance of The Winter's Tale was in the Globe in May 1611. It was then performed at court in front of King James in November 1611, and then at Whitehall Palace in England, preceding Princess Elizabeth's marriage to Frederick V in February of 1613. It was also performed at court in 1618, 1623, and 1634. We ultimately decided to stage our performance of The Winter's Tale at the Whitehall Palace during the wedding of Elizabeth in 1613 because The Winter's Tale is an inherently subversive play to the monarchy, and we were interested in simultaneously implicating the nobles, but also distancing King James from seeing himself in the play. Our goal was to create Leontes to be a less authoritative figure and more comedic, so that James would not have seen himself in the play. Since James was an absolutist, our intentions were to distance himself from the deterioration of the monarchy, so our humble company would keep our heads following this performance. We are also aware of the fact that James has seen The Winter's Tale before, and specifically requested it for his daughter's wedding. Therefore, our assumption was that James already wouldn't have found his authority implicated in the play. We also thought that perhaps he was reflecting Hermione onto Elizabeth, that this play could serve as a warning to Frederick to not dare accuse his daughter of adultery. Some other parallels to the play in real life at the time are that Elizabeth was called the Winter's Queen for the short amount of time that she ruled. Elizabeth was also engaged to the future king of Bohemia, just as Perdita becomes in The Winter's Tale. And Elizabeth's brother and James's heir died shortly before the wedding, just as Perdita's brother and Leontes' heir dies in The Winter's Tale.
We chose to do a visual storyboard telling of our scene while we perform our lines live. The character renderings that you will see on the screen will be very simplified. However, it was really important for us to capture the staging of the scene because we believe that the staging of the scene is crucial to how audiences will interpret the characters. In particular, Hermione and Paulina have the most lines in the scene. Keep watch as to whether Hermione and Paulina's dominance in their lines is either reflected or not reflected in the staging. At the same time, we felt that it was crucial that you, the audience, are constantly aware that we are performing at Whitehall. By having a digital rendering of the Whitehall Banquet Hall, it allows us to demonstrate certain limitations that we would have encountered if we were performing this live at DPC at St. Mary's, or if we were the actual King's Men performing at the actual Whitehall. Unlike the Globe Theatre, the Whitehall was not equipped with a trapdoor or a balcony from which actors could enter and exit from. We would have experienced the same limitations if we were performing at DPC, and the digital rendering of Whitehall thus allows us to still visibly show the type of entrances and exits that the King's Men would have had to use at Whitehall and we ourselves would have had to use at DPC. So now I'm going to invite everyone back so we can introduce ourselves.
Hi, I'm Mars. I'm going to be playing Leontes today. One thing that we wanted to do was to give a better idea of what our costumes might have looked like, and for the most part, we rendered them ourselves. So I, for example, drew our rendering of Leontes, but I didn't draw the rendering of the Lord. That's why there's some stylistic differences. You might notice that Leontes is wearing the imperial crown. At the time, there were a number of crowns that would have been prop crowns that would have been in possession of the King's Company, but an imperial crown was often used by the players as a quick signal of royalty. He is also decked out in his full regalia, including a long cape, which I myself am wearing to help stay grounded in the character. You will notice in our renderings of our sort of storyboard that Leontes will be denotated by this cape.
Hi, I'm Kelbey. I will be playing the officer for the first half of the scene, and you'll be able to tell by this hat. I have a piece of tape that says officer, but you can't really see it. For the second half of the scene, I'll be the narrator, and this will be the hat that I wear for the narrator. It also says narrator on it, but you can't see it. I did not draw my rendering of the officer because I can't draw, but Molly did, and it's amazing.
My name is Bethany, and I play the narrator in the first half of the scene, and the servant and the nobles in the second half of the scene. The servants can be identified in a storyboard when he enters is a brown shirt, and the nobles are the group of unidentified characters who remain on stage throughout the whole scene. The one noble can be identified as a man with a goatee later on. I will also be on book during the performance, so we all worked really hard to memorize the lines. However, if a person for some reason forgets a line, they will simply call out prithee, and you'll hear me read back their forgotten line to them.
My name is Samantha, and I will be playing Hermione this evening. In costuming Hermione, we wanted to show her in her very vulnerable state. She's in almost near undress, as you can tell by the image, in all white, and she has been dragged from prison, so she is a little more disheveled, in stark contrast to Paulina.
My name is Molly, and I am playing Paulina. She is one of the court ladies and a friend of Hermione's, and she is dressed for it. I put her in a dark color, which I have done my best to mimic, and she's got jewelry, she has her hair up, and she is ready to go.
Great. Well, thank you so much for listening to our short intro. But without further ado, we are proud to present The Winter's Tale, Act 3, Scene 2. Enter leontes, lords, and officers.
This sessions, to our great grief we pronounce, even pushes against our heart. The party tried, the daughter of a king, our wife, and one of us too much beloved. Let us be cleared of being tyrannous, since we so openly proceed in justice, which shall have due course, even to the guilt or the purgation. Produce the prisoner.
It is His Highness's pleasure that the Queen appear in person here in court.
Hermione enters. She is unguarded and unbound, with Paulina and her ladies trailing behind her.
Read the indictment.
Hermione, Queen to the worthy Leontes, King of Sicilia, thou art here accused and arraigned of high treason, in committing adultery with Polixenes, King of Bohemia, and conspiring with Camillo to take away the life of our sovereign lord the king, thy royal husband, the pretense whereof being by circumstances partly laid open, thou, Hermione, contrary to the faith and allegiance of a true subject, didst counsel and aid them, for their better safety, to fly away by night.
Leontes begins to erratically pace back and forth across the stage as Hermione begins to speak.
Since what I am to say must be but that which contradicts my accusation, and the testimony on my part no other than what comes from myself, it shall scarce boot me to say not guilty. Mine integrity, being counted falsehood, shall, as I express it, be so received. But thus, if powers divine behold our human actions as they do, I doubt not then, but innocence shall make false accusation blush, and tyranny tremble at patience. You, my lord, best know whom least will seem to do so. My past life has been as continent, as chaste, as true as I am now unhappy, which is more than history can pattern, though devised and played to take spectators. For behold me, a fellow of the royal bed, which owe a moiety to the throne, a great king's daughter, the mother of a hopeful prince, here standing to prate and talk for life and honor, for who please come to hear? For life, I prize it as I weigh grief, which I would spare. For honor, 'tis derivative from me to mine, and only that I stand for. I appeal to your own conscience, sir. Before Polixenes came to our court, how I was in your grace, how merited to be so, since he came with what encounter so incurrent, I have strained to appear thus. If one jot beyond the bound of honor in act or will, any way that inclining, hardened be the hearts of all that hear me, and my nearest kin cry fie upon my grave.
I ne'er heard yet that any of these bolder vices wanted less impudence to gainsay what they did them to perform at first.
That's true enough, though 'tis a saying, sir, not due to me.
You will not own it.
More than mistress of which comes to me in name of fault, I must not at all acknowledge. For Polixenes, with whom I am accused, I do confess I loved him as in honor he required, which might become a maid, a lady as myself, with a love even such so and no other as you yourself commanded, which not to have done, I think, had been in me both disobedience and ingratitude towards you and towards your friend, whose love had spoke ever since it could speak from an infant freely that it was yours. Now for conspiracy, I know not how it tastes, though it be dished for me to try how. All I know of it is that Camillo was an honest man, and why he left your court, the gods themselves, wotting not more than I, are ignorant.
You knew of his departure, as you know what you have undertaken to do in his absence.
Sir, you speak a language I understand not. My life stands in the level of your dreams, which I'll lay down.
Your actions are my dreams. You had a bastard by Polixenes, and I but dreamed it. As you are past all shame, those of your fact are so past all truth, which to deny concerns more than avails, for as thy brat hath been cast out, like to itself, no father owning it, which indeed is more criminal in thee than it. So thou shalt feel our justice, in whose easiest passage look for no less than death.
Sir, spare your threats. The bug which you would fright me with, I seek. To me, life can be no commodity. The crown and comfort of my life, your favor, I do feel it lost, for I do feel it gone. But I know not how it went. My second joy and first fruits of my body, from his presence I am barred like one infectious. My third comfort, starred most unluckily, is from my breast, the innocent milk in its most innocent mouth, haled out to murder. Myself on every post proclaimed a strumpet, with immodest hatred, the child bed privilege denied, which belongs to women of all fashion. Lastly, hurried here to this place in the open air, for I have strength of limit. Now, my liege, tell me what blessings I have here alive that I should fear to die. Therefore, proceed. But yet, hear this, mistake me not. No life, I prize it not a straw, but for mine honor which I would free. If I shall be condemned upon surmises, all proofs sleeping else but what your jealousies awake, I tell you, 'tis rigor and not law. Your honors all, I do refer me to the oracle. May Apollo be my judge.
This is your request, is altogether just. Therefore bring forth, and in Apollo's name, his oracle.
The Emperor of Russia was my father. Oh, that he were alive and here beholding his daughter's trial, that he did see the flatness of my misery, yet with eyes of pity not revenge.
Enter Cleomenes and Dion with the officer.
You here shall swear upon this sword of justice, that you, Cleomenes and Dion, have both been at Delphos, and from thence have brought this sealed-up oracle, by the hand delivered of great Apollo's priest, and that since then you have not dared to break the holy seal, nor read the secrets in it.
All this we swear.
Break up the seals and read.
Hermione is chaste, Polixenes blameless, Camillo a true subject, Leontes a jealous tyrant, his innocent babe truly begotten, and the king shall live without an heir, if that which is lost be not found.
Now blessed be the great Apollo.
Praised!
Hast thou read truth?
Aye, my lord, even so as it is here set down.
There is no truth at all in the oracle. This session shall proceed. This is mere falsehood.
Enter a servant.
My king, the lord, the king.
What is the business?
Oh, sir, I shall be hated to report it. The prince, your son, with mere conceit and fear of the queen's speed, is gone.
How gone?
Is dead.
Apollo's angry, and the heavens themselves do strike at my injustice.
Hermione collapses.
How now there?
This news is mortal to the queen. Look down and see what death is doing.
Take her hence. Her heart is but o'ercharged. She will recover. I have too much believed mine own suspicion. Beseech you, tenderly apply to her some remedies for life.
Paulina exits with officers carrying Hermione.
Apollo, pardon my great profaneness against thine oracle. I'll reconcile me to Polixenes, new woo my queen, recall the good Camillo, whom I proclaim a man of truth, of mercy, for being transported by my jealousies to bloody thoughts and to acts of revenge. I chose Camillo for the minister to poison my friend Polixenes, which had been done, but the good Camillo tardied my swift command. To my kingly guest unclasp my practice, quit his fortunes here, and to certain hazard of all uncertainties, himself condemned, no richer than his honor. How he glisters through my rust, and how his piety does my deeds make the blacker.
Paulina runs on stage almost hysterical.
Well, oh, cut my lace, lest my heart cracking it break too.
What fit is this, good lady?
Paulina turns to face Leontes.
What studied torments, tyrant, hast for me? What wheels, racks, fires, what flaying, boiling in leads or oils, what old or newer torture must I endure, whose every word deserves to taste of thy most worst? Thy tyranny, together working with thy jealousies, fancies too weak for boys, too green and idle for girls of 9. Oh, think what they have done, and then run mad indeed, stark mad, for all thy bygone fooleries were but spices of it. That thou betrayedst Polixenes, 'twas nothing. That did but show thee of a fool, inconstant, and damnable ungrateful. Nor was it much that thou wouldst have poisoned good Camillo's honor to have him kill a king. 4 trespasses, more monstrous standing by, whereof I reckon the casting forth 2 crows, thy baby daughter, to be or none or little, though a devil would have shed water out of fire ere done it. Nor is it directly laid to thee the death of the young prince, whose honorable thoughts, high for one so tender, cleft the heart that could conceive a gross and foolish sire, blemished his gracious dam. These are not, no, laid to thy answer, but the last. O lords, when I have said, cry woe. The queen, the sweetest, dearest creature's dead, and vengeance for it not dropped down yet.
Leontes falls to his knees.
The higher powers forbid.
I say she's dead, I'll swear it. If word nor oath prevail not, go and see. If you can bring tincture or luster to her lip, her eye, eat outwardly or breath within, I'll serve you as I would the gods. But, O thou tyrant, do not repent these things, for they are heavier than all thy woes can stir. 1,000 knees, 10,000 years together, naked, fasting upon a barren mountain and still winter, in storm perpetual, could not move the gods to look that way thou wert.
Paulina leans in towards Leontes' face. One of the lords attempts to pull her away, however she turns to glare at him before he can.
Go on. Go on. Thou canst not speak too much. I have deserved all tongues to talk their bitterest.
Say no more. However the business goes, you have made fault in the boldness of your speech.
I am sorry for it. All faults I make when I shall come to know them, I do repent. Alas, I have shown too much the brashness of a woman. He is touched to the noble heart. What's gone and what's past help should be past grief. Good my liege, sir, royal sir, do not receive affliction at my petition. I beseech you, rather let me be punished that have reminded you of what you should forget. My liege, forgive a foolish woman, the love I bore your queen. Lo, fool again. I'll speak of her no more, nor of your children. I'll not remember you of my own lord, who is lost too. Take your patience to you, and I'll say nothing.
Thou didst speak but well, when most the truth, which I receive much better than to be pitied of thee. Prithee, bring me to the dead bodies of my queen and son. One grave shall be for both. Upon them shall the causes of their death appear, unto our shame perpetual. Once a day I'll visit the chapel where they lie, and tears shed there shall be my recreation. So long as nature will bear up with the exercise, so long I daily vow to use it. Come and bring me to these sorrows.
All exit.
At the conclusion of our scene, we're met with the climax of the play's tragedy. Leontes is in mourning. His wife and his heir are dead because of his jealousy. And his daughter? Perdita is left for dead in the countryside, but time smiles upon her, and the rest of the play continues 16 years later, when she is in love, and eventually is reconnected with the family that she lost. Hermione is restored to life through miracle or through forgiveness and change. And the broken family can, as the oracle foretold, be whole again. Thank you so much for listening and watching to our performance, even in this strange format. But we would now like to move into our presentation on the behind-the-scenes research and process that went into much of what you saw today.
So when we first started researching for this scene, we really wanted to look into the public nature of the trial and the slander that Hermione was subjected to by Leontes. And we wanted to see how adultery was handled in early modern England. Would Leontes' choice to put Hermione on trial be considered normal or abnormal? And what were the procedures for a husband to follow if he believed that his wife was cheating on him? Throughout the 16th and 17th century, one could actually find a whole host of marriage handbooks, domestic guidebooks, and moral treatises proclaiming the right and Christian thing for him to do. One such conduct guide was written by William Perkin, as shown on the screen, and the title was A Christian Economy, or a Short Survey of the Right Manner of Erecting and Ordering Families According to the Scriptures, which was published in 1609. In the book, Perkins states that adultery and fornication are the most grievous and open crimes which do break the very bond and convent of marriage, and therefore, when they are certainly known by such persons, they are at no hand to be winked at, but the magistrate is present to be informed of them. So based on the statement that Perkin makes in his book, it would seem that the proper procedure would, for once adultery was discovered, it should be reported directly to the church officials. However, in practice, historical evidence points that in reality, husbands were less likely to go straight to the church officials, and instead he was kind of expected to deal with it privately first before going to local officials. In Martin Ingram's book, Church, Courts, Sex and Marriage in England, he states adultery cases were actually relatively in the minority. He notes the records of two churches, stated on the screen, that the parishes of Weil and Kevel in the period of 1591 and 1630 yielded a total of 85 immortality cases in which the marital status of the accused female can be positively ascertained. Married women were involved in 18 instances, or about 21% of the total. Studies of other villages would probably yield even smaller proportions. Furthermore, he states in his books that husbands were less inclined to report to authorities first, because that would mean his honor would be challenged in the most public manner. So local officials were expected to allow him ample opportunity to restrain his wife before resorting to legal action. In our scene, Leontes has essentially lost all his authority because of his decision to just straight go ahead and publicly accuse his wife of adultery instead of privately confronting her first. The actions of him fixing his crown, as well as dressing him in a very red, showy cape, was to symbolize his weak attempts to gain some of his authority and honor back. Such staging decisions was also meant to imply just how wrong Leontes was, because he did not take the appropriate actions of disciplining his wife. His decision to immediately personally slander her and then publicly put her on trial instead of privately disciplining her or reporting her to church authorities disrupts the status quo and jeopardizes the stability of his entire kingdom. So besides examining how Leontes would be perceived, we also wondered how would the nobles, both in the play and also in the court, react to Hermione's plight and whether they would have been sympathetic or not towards her. The most well-known adultery case within a royal court would probably have to be Anne Boleyn. King Henry VIII accused his wife of adultery, incest, and treason. The manner in which King Henry VIII and his supporters constructed their accusations against Anne was based on mock flirtations that she was basically accused of showing various people in her household. Nowadays, most historians agree that Anne was innocent of all the charges brought against her. And much like the accusations that Leontes brings on Hermione, the mannerisms that Anne's enemies used as evidence for her supposed adultery was really actually ambiguous in their intentions. So as a modern audience, we are privy to the knowledge and details of the tragedy of Anne Boleyn. However, we initially questioned whether Shakespeare and his audience would have sympathized with Anne, or if they even would have known about Anne Boleyn in the first place. In our research, we discovered that Shakespeare's play, Henry VIII, was actually written and performed in the same year as the 1613 Whitehall performance of The Winter's Tale. The play offers a more ambiguous and arguably a bit more sympathetic portrayal of Anne Boleyn. And based on the time frame that The Winter's Tale and Henry VIII share, it is thus safe to assume that Anne Boleyn was certainly in the minds of Shakespeare and that he wanted his audience to remember her as well. Another royal court scandal that would have swayed noble audiences to look at Hermione in a more favorable light was the scandal of Lady Arabella Stuart. So in 1610, James imprisoned his cousin Arabella for marrying without royal consent. Her arrest happened the summer right before the first recorded performance of The Winter's Tale at the Globe, and her continued imprisonment throughout 1613 would have resonated with those watching Hermione as a royal prisoner. At the same time, James had Arabella publicly decreed traitor when she attempted to flee the country with her husband, which mirrors the public slander that Hermione is subjected to in the play. In an essay by Alicia Thomason, she explains that throughout Arabella's ordeal, she relied heavily on political support from Queen Anne, James's wife, and the group of courtly ladies that Queen Anne surrounded herself by, as asking them to basically mediate between herself and James. And thus the scandal of Arabella would have been in the minds of people in court during Princess Elizabeth's wedding. The role that the court ladies play as mediators between Arabella and James I is also very reminiscent of the role that Paulina plays for Hermione. Earlier in the play, Paulina attempts to reason with Leontes and try to make him retract his accusations. Throughout the scene, we specifically staged Paulina so that she clearly entered and exit with Hermione, and that she was visible throughout the trial. Arabella's scandal and the contemporary portrayal of Anne Boleyn and Henry VIII made us reason that audiences would have been a bit more sympathetic towards Hermione, and thus we wanted the nobles in this scene to reflect that. So throughout the performance, you might have noticed that the nobles in the background were shown to look shocked by basically what was transpiring in the trial. Although none of the nobles vocally come to defend Hermione, their shock and disgust show that they do not necessarily agree with Leontes' choice to put his wife on trial. However, the second part of the scene, we tried to kind of balance out that staging and the disgust that the nobles show by showing the authenticity of Leontes' grief and regret after he learns of the deaths of his son and Hermione, by drawing Leontes covering his face with his hands and falling to the ground once he hears the news of their deaths. Furthermore, the choice to stage one of the nobles to appear as if he's trying to stop Paulina from barricading Leontes, and finally Paulina's choice to kneel down next to Leontes and then help him up at the very end of the scene, symbolize how people in Leontes' court were willing to forgive him and foreshadows his redemption in the final scenes of the play.
Hi, so the second thing that we were interested in researching was the presence of the oracle in Winter's Tale. We were interested in whether it was an accurate representation of how the oracle would have operated in ancient Greek times, and we were also interested in how the audience in the court would have seen the oracle during the early modern era. So Stephen Orgel argues that the oracle would have been rather like the word of the ghost of Hamlet, something the play requires you to believe, but that you know, as a good Reformation Christian, you were supposed to reject. So in the early modern era, playgoers would have implicitly recognized the authority of the oracle as a legal judiciary. However, they would have recognized the influences of the pagan god of the Apollo in the play, and the presence of the oracle would have reminded the playgoers that they were watching a play, and what they were seeing was not based on reality. The staging makes it much more feasible for us to stage the play at Whitehall during a royal wedding. King James would not have seen himself implicated in Leontes, and the other nobles would not have seen themselves implicated in the play. Next slide, please. So the picture on the left is a 1687 rendering of what the oracle would have looked like preaching at the Temple of Apollo. You can see her perched on a platform, I guess, preaching. And on the right is a picture that I took in Greece with Professor Charlebois of what the Temple of Apollo currently looks like. So the oracle in the Winter's Tale is not the most accurate representation of how the oracle would have been operating in ancient Greek times. The priestess Pythia would have only been operational for 1 day a month, and people who wish to have a prophecy handed down would have actually had to travel to Delphi. So Leontes ascending Cleomenes and Dion by proxy would not have been allowed by the rules of the oracle. And like the coincidence that they landed on Delphi on the 1 day per month that Pythia was handing down prophecies is kind of not going to happen. Next slide, please. So in Winter's Tale, the oracle says, Hermione is chaste, Polixenes blameless, Camillo a true subject, Leontes a jealous tyrant. So that the language in the play is vastly different from how the oracle would have actually handed down prophecies. The oracle would never decree someone chaste, blameless, or a tyrant. Rather, the oracle was always vague, giving prophetic speeches like the second half of the decree, the king shall live without an heir if that which is lost be not found. Next slide, please. So Leontes' dismissal of the oracle. So like I said in the intro, Shakespeare's main source for The Winter's Tale was Pendasto by Robert Greene. And so Pendasto immediately believes the oracle, and his son dying is viewed as retribution for not believing his wife. In The Winter's Tale, however, Leontes denies the oracle, and then Mamilius dies, and then Hermione dies. This frames his disbelief of Hermione as on par with divine wrath, that believing one's wife is akin to believing in the gods. Also, as the oracle is historically a female priestess, Leontes denying the oracle is once again him denying or disbelieving in female authority. In this way, Paulina becomes his guide through redemption, as she is an agent of Apollo and the oracle. Leontes must put his trust and his fate in a woman, something that he refused to do until now. We also considered staging the oracle as having the priestess enter on stage and read the prophecy, depicting her as female in order to present another instance of female authority that Leontes denies. But ultimately, we chose not to stage the oracle, because if he denied the oracle to his face, or to her face, and rejected her power in person, His redemption would be almost impossible in the context of the authority of the oracle. Next slide, please.
So as Kelbey mentioned, the oracle is kind of only one of the women in this scene who show a degree of power that women in early modern England didn't actually get that often. And that was something we kind of wanted to look into as well. So there was a strict social hierarchy in this period. The ideal wife was chaste, quiet, and obedient to her husband. And a family was supposed to be like a small kingdom with the husband ruling at the top and the wife and all of the children as his subjects. And a wife who didn't obey her husband was, in essence, acting against her king. And a husband who couldn't rule his wife was like a king with no power over his subjects, so he wasn't much of a ruler at all. And the language of marriage and rulership were closely tied together in this time period, and that's evident in The Winter's Tale. Earlier in the play, during her first confrontation with Leontes, Paulina tells him, "I'll not call you tyrant." And it's probably intentionally unclear here whether she meant as a tyrannous husband or a tyrannous king, because the facts of this matter, he's both. A tyrannous husband who decides out of nowhere that his wife is unchaste, and a tyrannous king who decides that his child is a bastard, that his queen must be punished, and that he needs the power of the entire kingdom behind him in order to exact that punishment. Hermione fights back with her words, but it's Paulina who really comes out as the most subversively powerful figure in this scene. So she did not have a counterpart in Pandosto. Shakespeare just invented her. And this is important to note because her existence kind of alters the course of the plot. Pandosto is just a straight up tragedy, but The Winter's Tale in the second half changes and becomes a comedy. So after Hermione collapses, Paulina returns and shows what makes her a figure who might have come off as actually a genuine threat to the social order. She is a masterless woman. Costume-wise, she's dressed as the influential lady she is, and we've seen in earlier scenes that she's not subservient to her husband Antigonus. When she brought the baby Perdita to Leontes, Leontes asked Antigonus, "What, canst not rule her?" Trying to kind of fit her into those boxes of a wife and a subject, but Paulina actually responds first that he can't, and Antigonus adds that he won't because he's never seen her be wrong before. So her husband didn't really have much control over her in the first place. And now in the scene we just showed you, he's not there at all. Leontes sent him away to abandon the baby, and he won't be coming back. If you guys know the stage direction Exit Pursued by a Bear, that's unfortunately Antigonus. But because Antigonus isn't there, the king can't call on her husband to control her, and one lord does try, but she has the bit between her teeth and she is furious, so she has no ruler here. Next slide, please. So the lack of a husband isn't the only thing that aligns Paulina with a threateningly powerful women. Her character is closely tied to witches and witchcraft throughout the play. During her first confrontation with Leontes, he threatens to have her burned. And during her speech in the scene that we showed you, she asked Leontes what studied tortures he has for her and lists off a lot of things associated with hell. In one of the biggest scenes in the show, later, she insists that she's not a witch and then kind of maybe uses magic to bring Hermione back to life. Now, witches were kind of a hot button topic in this era, and there was a lot of debate about whether they existed and what they were. People described them as anything from unusually knowledgeable women to just women who drew power from the devil. And some people saw them as women led astray, and to others they were ambitious or just plain malicious, which were kind of the same thing for women in that day. And King James himself was actually very interested in witchcraft, and he wrote a number of treatises on the subject. And this isn't the scene where staging can do much to determine whether or not Paulina is a witch, but solving that ambiguity would probably have been a subject of interest to the audience that we chose. Either way, she would have been a controversially powerful figure on the stage, which brings me to her final and strongest position here. Next slide, please. We wanted to portray Paulina as someone who is kind of taking power on purpose. So she has that moment in the staging where she shifts from anger to comfort. And whether or not this was her plan all along, it's unclear. And if that change in attitude was intentional, Paulina might have been interpreted as borderline villainous for trying to seize power, except her name, Paulina, associates her with St. Paul, who is generally accepted to be responsible for having written most of the New Testament of the Bible. So he's a notable figure in the church. And she does start out a slightly gentler figure in this scene. In the previous act, she came to Leontes saying she would be his physician and counselor to break him out of his jealous rage. In the second half of the play, after the time skip, we see that she has been sort of conducting his grieving process. So this aligns her with the consolatio tradition that would have been recognizable to some people in the early modern audience. It was a literary tradition of women acting as mentors and advisors to men who are spiritually ill or wounded. In Boethius's Consolation of Philosophy, the narrator, the Roman senator Boethius himself, has been physically imprisoned and has gone spiritually blind. The lady of philosophy comes to him and literally sits down at his side and engages him in a debate to cure him of his spiritual blindness. So Paulina fulfills a similar role here with one major difference. She begins this healing process by tearing Leontes apart. And arguably, she keeps him from healing for those 16 years until she decides that he's repented enough. Her role here puts her in an enormous position of power. She controls the king, and she gets to decide when he can remarry and when he can get himself another heir. And she gets to decide when he's sorry enough. So she spends the whole first part of the play sort of jumping between these two roles, an accuser, a threatening woman, maybe a witch, and a counselor and a healer. And at some point during the scene, she chooses to be a counselor. We placed it just before her line, he is touched to the noble heart, showing that she is acknowledging that he is truly sorrowful and that maybe, just maybe, he can try to make up for it. And that is where she decides to take the role of a healer. Next slide.
So in terms of Leontes and his arc of power, it's tied very closely to an emotional arc that he goes throughout this scene. You may have noticed that he starts incredibly bitter, angry, vindictive, and irrational in the way that he talks and that he moves. So what he would have been going through and what Shakespearean audiences would have understood Leontes was going through was a kind of affliction that medically they called melancholy, which was sort of a catch-all term, at least according to Robert Burton, who wrote this incredibly dense volume detailing every little thing you could ever want to know about their understanding of melancholy. It's essentially any mental problem you could have, ranging from depressive and anxiety disorders to inherited other disorders. Leontes in particular, though, it would be assumed that the jealous rage that he's in is more of an affliction, a malady, one that can be treated, but most commonly one that needs some kind of force to snap him out of it. So, in terms of how we determined this is what he was going through, a lot of the text aligns with what would be considered symptoms of melancholy, which, according to Robert Burton, include suspicion and jealousy, the common idea of mistaking and amplifying every little thing people say, ready to snarl upon every small occasion. You might have noticed in the scene that Leontes tends to bite back these long, beautifully constructed logical arguments that Hermione gives with quick little phrases or scoffs like, "You will not own it. You will not own the fact that you did wrong because obviously I must be right." That kind of thing. And so as this jealousy that is a symptom of an affliction emerges in Leontes, it undermines his position of power, which of course was our goal in the first part of the scene. The closer he is to this melancholy, the less legitimacy he seems to have in his rightness or fitness to be an authority figure, which means that all of the times that he's putting Hermione on trial, all of the times that he's yelling at her, accusing her of more and more serious acts, not just adultery, but treason as well, conspiring with Camillo to kill him, things that to the early modern audience would have been signs that it's not that Leontes is irredeemable, but he is under this fit of jealousy, and he needs to be cured of it before he can have any claim to legitimacy as a ruler. In terms of how that influenced our staging, we have the idea of the restlessness. He is particularly prone to these fidgety actions. He paces back and forth. In our storyboard, we have him moving around Hermione while she's very planted, very stable. He is constantly moving to try and emphasize that indecisiveness, that restlessness, this idea that he's not going to tarry in one place long, as the Anatomy of Melancholy might suggest. He, of course, as all this is going on, it's very clear to the audience that he's not fit to be putting his wife on trial, and the idea of even putting his wife on a public trial is an indication that whatever's going on with him, it's something that needs to be fixed before he can assume an actual claim to control. But of course, this play doesn't just have him stay in a fit of jealousy the whole time, he snaps out of it. And it has to propel him on this track towards redemption by the end of the play. So in order to get him from this high point of anger to this point of redemption, along comes 2 deaths, which are enough to snap him out of it. Next slide, please. So the main thing that I ended up researching within context to Leontes is mourning practices and burial practices that would have been going on at the time. There are 2 very significant deaths in this scene, and it stands to reason that somebody might be curious as to what to do with those deaths. Even though they're not necessarily deaths seen on the stage, nevertheless, what we researched in terms of mourning influenced some of our staging as well. So for a bit of historical background, officially, Protestantism was the religion of England at the time. This was in place during the Elizabethan period, but also carried over into the Jacobean period, although arguably with less of an emphasis. But nevertheless, the country and its official practices were meant to be Protestant. At the time, of course, there was a good deal of the population that was Catholic and practicing Catholic. So at the time, displays of any sort of religious ritual became a hot button political issue, which means that even the acts of mourning your loved ones would have been a political issue. The reason why I bring this up is because the Catholic mourning practice at the time was communally based. It was based in public displays of grief and public displays of tears, shouting, things like that, which, according to one of the readings I did, is known as wailing for the dead. There's this idea that women in particular, because this was aligned with femininity, would, to make a political statement, be particularly dramatic in their mourning practices, which was considered subversive and threatening to the monarchy, which was trying to establish this idea of Protestant mourning practices, which were much more internalized, introspective, they were personal, they were meant to be shut away. There was this idea that was called rigorism, which was along the more extreme side, and there were debates in the Protestant faith over how heavily this rigorism should be enforced. But it was essentially that in terms of any and all grief, it should be, the more virtuous someone is, the less need there is to have these public displays of grief because they are already in heaven. Why bother? That kind of thing. So why am I bringing this up? With Paulina in particular, you might have noticed that she is extremely vocal when she mourns the death of Hermione. It's in her text. She has these big dramatic speeches, these allusions, these literature allusions to her heart cracking the bodice of her lace and breaking. She's doing this loud, passionate, she's shouting things like, "O lords, when I have said, cry thy woe." She's extremely vocal, which in the context of the scene, Leontes being pretty much at the bottom in terms of power at this point, she's being vocal enough to state some kind of, I wouldn't call it a power grab, but it's certainly, she's the voice that carries in this scene, and she's the one proclaiming that she's the one with the power to essentially control the room. They're the one, the surrounding nobility have to listen to her as she publicly, because this is a public trial, she's publicly shaming Leontes, publicly subverting some of that power that he would normally have. Leontes, in contrast, the way that he mourns is, I would argue, more in line with the Protestantism. He does not say anything about anything directly about the death of his wife and son when the news is delivered. He's more focused on repenting, talking to Apollo, or on his friend Camilla, who is still alive, and the stuff that can be done to repair relations with him. That being said, in terms of our staging, Paulina is a lot more in his space. She looms over him. He backs up as she comes towards him while she's doing this public grief, whereas he sort of crumples to the ground. He's on his knees, but he's internalizing a lot of the guilt and a lot of the mourning. He's not crying. He's not audibly sobbing or anything like that. There's a much more internally focused, more body language style of his mourning. In terms of the end of this scene, Leontes is on his way to redemption, because now that he's thrown himself off of this fit of melancholy, there is this reestablishment of he has some legitimacy again. The way he's conducting himself is more worthy of the kingliness that he should have been presenting from the very beginning. But as this scene wraps up, he some of the more commanding things he does is prepare for the funeral rites of his queen and his son. So therefore, the idea behind that would be, as he is sort of restoring his power, he's aligning himself with the Protestant practices of grief. He's being more assertive. He's being more of the king that he should be. And it might even be considered as a reestablishment or reinforcement of the status quo, which he should have been upholding in the first place. But since he wasn't, he hadn't had that kind of power at the beginning. Next slide, please. I just wanted an illustration of the kinds of ways that the nobility, the Protestant nobility, tried to reinstate their power with relation to burial practices. So this is one of many plates illustrating the funeral of Sir Philip Sidney, who was an accomplished poet and writer. This was during the Elizabethan period, but it was one of a few very elaborate Protestant funeral processions that was made in an effort to help reaffirm the power of the Church of England and the power of the monarchy behind that church. This is the kind of thing that we were trying to embody, in that now that Leontes has taken the steps to redemption, he is reasserting himself with the power that he now deserves to have. Next slide, please.
Contrast to the instability of Leontes' jealousy, we really wanted to focus on the feminine power in this scene. Hermione and Paulina, far away, dominate the textual breadth of the scene. Therefore, when working on Hermione, we wanted to make sure that she was also dominating the stage. Though this direct center staging was not often used in Jacobean theater, we wanted to give her as much focus as possible as Leontes flickers around behind her, showcasing her stability in this very turbulent scene. But what I found most interesting is not where she is strong, but how clear the text makes the cracks in her strength and where those cracks exactly lie. If you look at the heartbeat, the meter of the lines, the places she touches on Leontes' accusations are the places where her meter itself begins to falter. Because meter is so often used, especially in the later plays, as denotations of status and power, this is something that Leontes' accusations actively works to undermine. He's undermining her integrity, her sense of reputation, but also the structural integrity of her life. She is a queen and a mother, and these are things she's willing to lay down her life for. She fights for her honor and her integrity, not for herself, but for her children, which are incredibly important parts of her life. Another important part of her life is her faith. Hermione's language is steeped in the iconographic. Honor, chastity, favor, blessings, all of these words that have a very overt religious tone. It is clear that she has a deep faith, which is why she gives herself over to the judgment of the oracle. She has the moral high ground over Leontes here as well. This is also something that we showed through costume. Putting her in white and blue both shows the vulnerability of being seen in a disheveled state of near undress, and a cultural religious symbol of innocence, which translates to a modern audience really well, an audience as well. Next slide, please. Another major time of female power in Jacobean England was surrounding pregnancy and birth, because pregnancy was a highly powerful and dangerous time for women. There was a lying in period for women surrounding the birth of a child where only women were able to come in contact with the mother. It was unseemly to have a woman appear in public during this time before the christening of her child, as Hermione clearly also states in her speech. As sickness and death were commonly hand in hand with pregnancy, the fact that Hermione is treated with so much cultural disregard at, quote, His Highness's pleasure, it's frankly disturbing, both to the characters on stage and to those in the audience. If we can go to the next slide. This play has been incredible to work with, being able to bridge the gaps between comedy and tragedy that are foundations of the romance play. Power, politics, witches, and women, we were able to explore many different avenues through our research that was deeply rooted in our interpretation of the play. We, as the King's Company of 2020, would like to thank you very much for indulging in our fancies, and would like to now open up the floor for questions about our work. If you go down to the participants tab, you'll be able to raise your hand, and Professor Charlebois will moderate from there. But if everyone can come back, we'd like to do just a little mini curtain call. So once everyone's here, ready?
Hey,
Go Kelbey!
unmute yourselves.
Woo! 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 Woo!
All right, what I'd love to do is I'm going to take questions, and we'll let the company respond to them. From Carolyn Zerthusen, what's your question?
I don't know if my microphone is working or not, but I just wanted to, I don't know if this is really a comment or a question, but I thought it was really interesting when Leontes was presenting about how James was, correct me if I'm wrong, but James was a Catholic ruler, correct?
No.
But Leontes was being kind of presented as Protestant in his grieving. So I just thought that was an interesting idea, and I just was curious how James would have taken that, because you were kind of saying that Paulina was kind of grieving in a kind of a traditionally Catholic way, while Leontes would have been grieving in kind of a Protestant way. And I was just wondering if you thought about that in your research.
Sure. So we were constantly hyper aware of the fact that our staging idea was in front of a king. It came up many times, but King James was Protestant. And although from what I understood, he was less adamant about enforcing or coming after the religious schisms that were in place at the time. But in terms of like thinking about the audience at hand, I mean, Shakespeare himself had the burial practices that he alludes to in his plays are all over the they're all over the place. Just as we have an oracle at Delphos and Christian burial practices in the same play, it's all kind of jumbled together. And although we didn't want to implicate the king so much in Leontes, the fact that the audience would have sort of already recognized that all of the practices are jumbled in and in the world of the play, hopefully, you know, it wouldn't have been too subversive of a move or anything like that. I'm sorry, does that answer your question? Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
Anybody else?
Yeah, Carolyn was staging Shakespeare from 2013 and played Hamlet.
So cool.
I need to see some hands. Questions for the King's Company. Molly Belson.
Hello. I was just wondering if there was any particular reason why you all chose this scene in particular, and whether you made any staging choices in this performance that made you want to choose this scene as opposed to other scenes.
So we were like allowed to choose between 3 scenes, and I think we were allowed to choose between this scene and specifically the exit pursued by a bear scene. And I think our biggest thing was that we didn't want to have to do the exit pursued by a bear via Zoom because it's just such a big scene, and we didn't know if we would be able to like translate that well on the on this stage. And we were also super interested in like female power and female authority, and I think like even though Hermione dies and Hermione is like on trial for adultery in this scene, she is the most powerful figure in this scene. And then Paulina comes next, and Leontes just has no authority at all. So I think we were really interested in how Leontes is supposed to be the king in this scene, and then like he's completely undercut by Hermione and then by Paulina. And so we were just really interested in how like typical gender roles in Shakespearean times would have been like completely opposite from the way that this scene works. And I think we were just super interested in like portraying our women as powerful as they could possibly be.
Cool, thank you for answering my question.
Of course.
And Molly graduated from St. Mary's last spring.
Yes.
Question, John.
Hold on. Amy Steiger to everyone. So Bethany, you worked on the Arabella Stewart connection. Could you speak to the image?
Yes, is that what the, sorry, I can't find it.
It's in the chat.
Unfortunately, I do not know that answer. To get some more background on her, when I was researching, I did actually just go to like the Wikipedia page just to get some basic facts, because I hadn't known about the scandal at all. I'd actually stumbled upon the story while looking for more sources on adultery, and on JSTOR someone happened to write like this whole article on Arabella and pertaining to the Winter's Tale, and that was something really cool to find, because we had really been looking at how like King James would have received the King's Men performance of the Winter's Tale, considering, as Kelbey touched on in the beginning, just how subversive it was. And so I think finding this scandal helped to add more kind of political context to the performance in 1613, because there wasn't really anything directly about that performance that we could find in our research.
Thanks for the question. I'm going to call on Katie Marquette next, who graduated in 2014 and actually played Hermione in the scene in staging Shakespeare in 2013.
Yeah, it was great to revisit this scene. So really good job. Samantha, you did an awesome job as Hermione. I was very impressed. I wanted to ask about the costuming, specifically with Leontes. It looked like, maybe I'm wrong, but it looked like the only time he didn't have any of his royal garb on was when he was sort of crying out to Apollo. Was that on purpose? Because he looked very vulnerable. And also the times he took on and off his crown, just the thought process behind that.
I can talk about the crown if somebody wants to talk about the other part. So we put him in his full regalia to sort of highlight his insecurity. He's desperately trying to assert power in this scene over and over, and he's consistently and viciously undermined time and time again. Like, he really doesn't stand a chance. So the reason why we had the crown adjustments, that's what they're supposed to represent. If we had been at DPC, the idea is I would be wearing a crown, and from time to time I would fiddle with it self-consciously, or just in general, to sort of highlight again that twitchy way we were trying to portray him, very flighty, very in complete contrast to Hermione and the way that she was acting. I mean, she doesn't do a ton of movement, that kind of thing. But about the kneeling, I'm if somebody else wants to talk about that.
What's the specific question again about that?
It was right after when he
just.
Oh, I'm sorry. Are you talking, Professor Schell? Okay. It's when he's like kneeling down, when he's learned that his son and Hermione have died, and he's sort of crying out to Apollo. Apollo's angry. It looks like he wasn't wearing anything. It looked like he didn't have his cape on. He didn't have his crown. He just looked very vulnerable, and I thought that was reflecting his vulnerable state in that moment. So I just didn't know if there was a thought process behind that. And it also sort of mirrored to me the white that Hermione was wearing. So at that moment, they both kind of were in that same vulnerable state, but one of them's guilty and one of them isn't. So if you didn't mean to do it, it was great.
Thank you, Katie, so much for that question. And I'm gonna, Alex Rhodes is in the queue, so I'm gonna call on Alex. Alex was part of the 2017 Staging Shakespeare cohort and played Amelia. Alex, we can't hear you.
Yeah, we're having a hard time.
It's getting kind of ecstatic.
Could you type your question in the chat?
Oh, the wonders of technology.
Yeah, my internet connection is also a little unstable, so I might.
You got it through. Alex, if you want, you can chat your question. Okay, that's good. Lisa Davidson, also Staging Shakespeare alum from 2011, and she played the Antigonus eaten by that bear.
I did indeed. I'm also here with my fiance, who thoroughly enjoyed the performance but is otherwise distracted. But I was really curious about the idea of Leontes being played in a comedic way, so that way King James didn't see himself in that character, which I totally get. You don't want to die as Shakespeare and the King's Men. But how does that impact the interpretation of the character and the interpretation of the play? Because it is very much, drama beginning, comedy on the back end kind of thing. And then I wasn't quite sure, I didn't see so much of that in the performance of Leontes today. So I was just wondering if thoughts on that kind of stuff.
Leontes.
Yeah, I guess that's me. Yeah, I don't know. In terms of like, I don't know if comic is the word that I would have wanted to use for our interpretation. I think maybe comic in the sense that the powerlessness that I think being a subject of ridicule might be. But in terms of like that word, I don't know if that's the one that I think was more consistent with our interpretation. We were definitely looking more for like illegitimacy more than comedy, I would say, just because the way that he talks, the things that he says, they ramble and he talks himself in circles, especially if you've read some of the earlier scenes. He does a lot of this where it's so difficult to follow what he's saying that you have to really intensely try to figure out how many threads he's got in his brain, because he'll go back and forth, you know, he'll be like, I ne'er heard yet that any of these bolder vices had less impudence, you know, things that you don't entirely understand, which is why when we had to do our paraphrasing, there was a lot of sitting down and puzzling out what on earth he's trying to say. Yeah, I think it was more like Leontes is essentially talking nonsense for the first 2/3 of this scene until he's hit with like 2 gut blows that snaps him out of the melancholy. So I would align him a lot closer with like the powerlessness or the lack of credit that you might give somebody raving mad, that kind of thing. I hope that helps.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really good. Just as always, thinking it's been 10 years and I still think about this play. So yeah, good to have some new thoughts.
Awesome. Thank you. Alex had a question about the in the chat about the wearing the crown and
sorry, I don't know that one.
Right, let me pull up my crown notes. So in terms of like crowns and wearing the crowns, I don't know specifically how close of a replica it would have been. From what I understand, there was this emphasis in the theater troupes with making their royalty costumes look flashy and look, you know, somewhat like as opulent as they would have been in the court. But of course, because they didn't have access to the funds to get a lot of these, I know that, for example, like they would use copper instead of gold to achieve like the looks of like gold lace, other gold artifacts. So based on my educated guess, the imperial crown, although it's not the only one that they would have had several replica crowns. The imperial crown was the one most used because it was just an easily recognizable symbol. But I doubt it would have been like a true replica. People would get an idea of that's what they're going for and let their imaginations and the general elasticity of the playtime performance carry the rest, if that makes sense. Yeah, Kelbey, for sure.
I was also just gonna add that like at this time when the Winter's Tale is being performed, like sumptuary laws aren't like a thing at this point, and like James wasn't a big proponent of like enforcing them, or like he rolled a lot of them back when he became king. So like that's why our actors are allowed to wear like the red cape when they wouldn't have been able to wear that when sumptuary laws were still a thing. So I think that it would have been less of a problem for Leontes to wear a crown in our troupe, even especially because it would have been a replica. It wouldn't have been the actual imperial crown.
Oh, and for context, for those who might not know, sumptuary laws are the laws that prohibit people from wearing things that weren't of their social station. So even if you were an actor, you weren't supposed to be wearing purple, even though this could have been considered purple, that kind of thing.
All right, we've got time for one, maybe two more questions if we've got to keep our answers close. We got a long program tonight. So, Brianna.
Hi. So you guys did a lot of research, which is obvious. Though I was wondering if like you researched like the time period around Shakespeare, but if like Shakespeare's life, like his personal life, like influenced kind of how you did the play or thoughts on the play. Because I know, like from what I know of Shakespeare's life, like I mean, he got married to his wife after getting her pregnant, I'm pretty sure. And like he wasn't necessarily the most like you had to be Christian to some extent, but he also like wasn't the most like religiously adherent person. So I wonder if like that you put any thought to like that and like how his own personal views might have like found their way into this play that's so about like morality, especially around like marriage.
We didn't do so much research about Shakespeare himself. Our research more focused on the time period that we were staging this play in, around 1613, I believe.
1613.
And like what our audience and what our environment would have been, and less than we were more focused on our audience and our environment of the actual performance more than the writing of or Shakespeare. But if anyone else has.
Yeah, I read one article about like how like syncretic the religion was in all of Shakespeare's plays. Like he's very much like pagan influences, Protestant influences, Christian, like Catholic influences. He sort of is all over the place. So, and like in some plays he's very pessimistic of certain religions, some he's very not. So I didn't really research like specifically what Shakespeare believes, but just that like his plays are all over the place. And so that we didn't really have like a specific answer to that. But if Sam wants to say something.
Yeah, just really briefly. It's also, The Winter's Tale was incredibly late in Shakespeare's career. And so, and also a lot of the plays went through a lot of revisions that may not have even been done by Shakespeare before they were put into the folio format that we were using, because we use the copy of the books that are the Arden Shakespeare editions, which are kind of edited versions of what we've been given. So there's a lot of blending and creative license taken over the years, as with any piece of media. So we really wanted to focus on our own interpretations and the general cultural surroundings as well.
Great. Rachel Bronstein, also from the Winter's Tale group from 2013.
Hi, this has been so awesome. I could not imagine all the challenges you all have had to go through with also converting this specific class to online. My question is kind of around that too, just with your staging choices. Obviously, it's a little hard to stage on camera, but just curious with like the selection that you've showed us with these slides. Was this your original intention to stage it with like Hermione standing and Leontes standing, Paulina being right by Hermione's side, or was your original idea to originally have like a throne or something else, or is this the vision all along?
So I think, Sam, were you going to say something?
No, you can go ahead.
Okay. When we were first, even before we chose Whitehall, we were kind of playing around with how we wanted to stage Leontes and Hermione. And so if we were at the Globe, we played at the Globe with the Blackfriars, where, you know, a lot of the times at the Globe, they have the balcony, and then at the Blackfriars, they have aisles that actors can walk through the audience with. And so we had thought of either staging Leontes like on the stage while Hermione was on the balcony, or Hermione would actually be in the audience at the Blackfriars while Leontes remained on stage. But when we made the decision to do Whitehall, we obviously couldn't do either of those stagings, but we really wanted to have Hermione still central. And as a lot of people have already talked about before, we really wanted to put her in the most central place of the stage so that she would be given the focus of the scene and not Leontes, because, you know, even though she is on trial, she is the one who is holding the power.
Thanks, Rachel. That's an awesome question. Rachel also has been known to don a bear suit on occasion, just saying. Well, thank you very much, Kingsmen and women, for a wonderful, wonderful performance presentation. And I'm going to now go to our intermission. We'll have about 5-minute break so everybody can stretch their legs. And then we'll all come back and hear from the Lord Chamberlain's company and their work on Twelfth Night.